for those of us who are Christian, for those of us who follow Jesus Christ, we know that we don't shrink back from death, that when it casts its long shadow over us, that we don't fear. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't hurt when death does its stuff, because we do. But we've come here today, we've come to worship God, to fellowship with one another, and to give voice to that hurt. And in doing all of those things, it's my prayer that we find some healing. And if you allow yourself to find healing in all of these things, that would be good. I met Mike in March of 1988 at a ping pong tournament. And ping pong became sort of a backdrop to our lives. We played it as often as we reasonably could over the years. And we loved the game supremely, both of us did. We played it hard and we loved it. But that's not the only thing that we enjoyed in this life together. We both enjoyed classic rock music, and we would often quiz each other on song titles, lyrics, band names, and so on. And he was very good at that. We also, many other things, we looked around at life and saw things happening and would compare them to Seinfeld episodes. I remember one time something was going on and we both looked at each other at the same time and quoted the exact same line from Seinfeld as we laughed. Those are the kind of things that we shared. We would sometimes share endless strings of text message conversations back and forth that really contained nothing more than a lot of bad puns that would sometimes last all day, and they were very bad. But I know that if everyone here had the opportunity to stand at this microphone, you would share similar stories. There were things that you did, that he did. There were things that you liked, that he liked. And we would have so many stories to share. Mike was a great conversationalist, and if he talked to a stranger, in a matter of minutes, he would find sort of common ground and begin to share with him. That's the way that he was. But I'm going to suggest to you that all of those things that we share, those common interests, those hobbies, those whatever they were, that in a way they were just backdrops. They were just something in the background. There was something else taking place. If I can, I'll use this analogy. All of those interests, all of those things that we shared with Mike, they were like props on a stage. And there was a play going on. And they were the props in the background. They were, if you've seen a play, the actors are on stage and there's a couch and a clock on a wall and a telephone. And that's what they were, because what was really going on in Mike's life was taking place on center stage. And it wasn't all of the other things. It was his love for Jesus Christ. And that's really what was taking place with Mike. You could come and take all of those props away, and his love for Jesus Christ would still go on. His daughter Sarah did a marvelous job with the obituary in the paper to take all of these aspects of Mike's life and write it. It's a daunting task. She did a marvelous job, and there was one line in it. As I was reading it, I read this line, and I had to stop. I couldn't even go any further. I just had to reread it and just meditate on it. And she wrote, "He studied the gospel." I love that line. And Sarah is enough of an English major to know not to say he had studied the gospel. As if it was something that he did. He checked off a list, that he marked it and set it aside and went on to something else. He studied it. It was ongoing. It was something that he did constantly. And I suppose I am privileged to have a small 2-bit role in that center stage act with that passion of his. We taught Sunday school together. We taught Bible studies together and went on mission trips together. I say often that Mike, I don't say he was my best friend. There's almost something juvenile in that. He was my closest friend. Someone and I think it was that, his love for the gospel, which really drew me to Mike. That's what was taking place on center stage for him. There's a story that I would sometimes prompt Mike to tell and at Bible studies and Sunday school. It's really one of my favorite stories, and I had many from Mike. Now, I didn't witness it, and I actually asked Karen if I could share this, and she gave me permission. A number of years ago, Mike, as many of you know, was involved in leadership at this church. He was an elder, and as Karen put it, he wasn't just in leadership, he was really the face of leadership at this church. If you thought of leaders, if you thought of the leadership, you pictured Mike. He's the one that everyone went to. He's the one that got things done, and we all know that to be true. Well, as the story is told, one Sunday, Mike had come to church, and there was an older gentleman in church that had a bone to pick with leadership. And he pulled Mike aside, and he began to kind of just harp on him and tell him all the things that he had done wrong and the things that they should be doing right and so on. And Mike tried to get away and say, well, we're here to have church. Can we talk about this later? And the man wouldn't hear it and just kind of went on and on. And so Mike graciously just bit his lip and listened. Now, and I don't know if it was later that day or later, short time later, I know exactly. But Mike and Karen were traveling, and they went past the man's house. And this was just after one of our famous Somerset County snowstorms. And there was the same man was in the driveway, and he was shoveling. And just older man with a shovel in this mountain of snow that he was moving. And Mike drove past, and he just kind of sighed because he knew exactly what he needed to do. So he stopped the truck and turned around and parked it. And as he got out, Karen decided to remain behind and pray. And Mike walked over to the old man as he was shoveling, took the shovel from him, and began to shovel his driveway. Now, one would think that the kindness that Mike showed this old man would have melted his heart, and perhaps he would have just quietly watched or helped or something. Or maybe Mike's selfless act would have caused him to offer an apology. But that wasn't the case. The respite that he earned from watching Mike do his work gave him breath to say exactly what he wanted to say to Mike. He picked up the conversation from church and just continued to harp on him about all the things that he was doing wrong while Mike was shoveling his driveway free. Now, Karen said she knew when this was taking place because his shoveling became very vigorous at this particular time. And he just continued to shovel. And what I love about that story is Mike's understanding of the gospel, because that story tells you how he saw the gospel. It tells you how he interpreted the gospel. Paul would say that if your enemy is thirsty, give him drink. If he's hungry, give him something to eat. And if his driveway is full of snow, shovel it. And that's what Mike did. It's how he saw the gospel being played out. And at great cost to his own self, many times over, he did that. See, he studied the gospel because he lived the gospel. He lived it out. He would roll up his sleeves and live it. He didn't just share the gospel with words. That wasn't enough. He shared it by rolling up his sleeves and showing the arms of the gospel. He rolled up his sleeves and he showed him the arms of love. He showed him the arms of God. And now this man who understood that the gospel was rolling up his sleeves, this man who rolled up his sleeves, is resting in the arms of a God who rolls up his sleeves. Because that's how the gospel is. God himself rolls up his sleeves. And that's how Mike saw it. After Mike's passing, my wife, Cynthia, and I received a lot of texts and calls, and everybody wanted to kind of help. Everybody wanted to do something. We certainly appreciate that. And we talked to Karen, and she kind of approved this. And that is, if you'd like to do something, if you'd like to somehow express your appreciation, then here's what you can do. Roll up your sleeves and find someone who has a need. Find someone who doesn't have and give. Go on a mission trip, even if it's for a day. Donate a few hours at the food pantry or go to the homeless shelter. Do something. Roll up your sleeves and in memory of Mike, just work for a few hours. And then when you're done, send Karen a note. If you don't know how to reach her, there's an email address in the bulletin today. It's Brandon's here at the church. You can send it to him and he'll make sure that Karen gets it. And just say, today, in memory and honor of Mike, I rolled up my sleeves, and this is what I did. And I know that the family will love to hear those stories. They would love to know that we're picking up the legacy that Mike gave us. And we're rolling up our sleeves to show the arms and love of God. One last thought. In 1 Corinthians chapter 16, that Paul was ending his letter to the church in Corinth. And they don't have a leader. There's no elders that we know of in that church. And he says to the church, he said, look at the household of Stephanas. There was a man named Stephanas in the church, evidently. And I like the way the King James said it. He said, look after them because they're addicted to service. There's your leader. There's the person that you pattern yourself after. This man who's addicted himself to service. I can easily and with confidence say the same thing about my closest friend Mike, that he was addicted to service. And he was a leader. Thank you.